Joining us now is Representative Thomas Massie, the congressman proudly serving Kentucky's 4th District. Congressman, over the past couple of days, we've seen these increasing calls to defund the police. And it's actually not an entirely new premise. In fact, some libertarians even once called for the very same thing, albeit for different reasons. But the party has shifted a little bit over the years since then. What are your responses to the calls to defund the police?
I think those would be libertarians, not libertarians. I believe in Adam Smith's view of government, and that is that we have a role, but it's a very small role. We provide for a system of justice. We provide for the defense of the public and for the infrastructure. And then pretty much everything outside of that is government overreach. But those three basic functions, which include the police, are essential to a functional society.
And so when we hear these calls growing from the more left part of the party, the more progressive wing of the party, I'll call it, what do you think that the Republican Party should do to kind of capitalize on that? Because, I mean, we can look at polls and we see that Americans are generally pretty accepting of the nation's police force. I mean, yes, they may agree with some reforms, but abolishing the police is not something that the majority of Americans are on board with. So how should Republicans try to capitalize on this going into an election year?
Well, here's the problem. Yes, it's just the most progressive part of the party, but I work in Washington, D.C. with them, and they're controlling the agenda. Nancy Pelosi has to take into account what they want, and they drive the agenda. So my message as a Republican running against a Democrat this fall would be don't vote for chaos. Don't vote for the Democrats, because any Democrat who's elected to the House of Representatives is going to vote for Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker, and then the radical left is controlling the agenda up there. So, you know, vote for a sustainable society, vote for logic and reason. I think the Democrats are the party of chaos now.
And Joe Biden has even said that to some degree himself. I mean, he said that his VP pick will be more important than prior VP picks. He said that he's going to put out his cabinet positions so people get a better idea of exactly who's filling those positions prior to the election. So I think he sees himself as a vehicle for these more progressive things. In fact, he said it himself in the past. So that puts a greater emphasis then on these other issues, one being the economy and how it intersects with the coronavirus pandemic. And in fact, you support a piece of legislation that looks to help farmers during this time, the Prime Act. Can you explain to me and our viewers a little bit what that is and what it would do for the average farmer?
Yeah, the Prime Act now has 50 sponsors in the House, bipartisan. We're up to 8 in the Senate. Another senator joined today. It would solve the problem that farmers are facing and consumers are facing, and that is the processing of meat in this country has failed because of the virus and because 4 large companies control 80% of the meat packing. My bill would reduce regulations on small processors so that farmers could sell directly to consumers locally there in their own states, and that would prevent the shortages we've seen in the supermarket. That would reduce the prices we've seen in the supermarket, but it would also increase the price that a farmer sees, or the value that they receive for their animals, because you're basically cutting out these multinational middlemen that controls, they have a monopoly on meat processing. And that most of the public didn't know that until COVID hit and those 4 big companies had to shut down.
And that is really interesting, too, because even prior to COVID, too, you could argue that a big part of the trade war with China was really making things more competitive, kind of bringing some of those resources back to the farmers that you're talking about right now. In fact, the White House even stimulated some of the farmers when there was a tit-for-tat type of tariff response regarding the back and forth between China. So when we look at that, what's happening with farmers and the big picture about the coronavirus as well, what should the focus of the government be while it's looking to reopen the economy? Should we look to reopen things first and then worry about another relief package, if you will, even though I'm hesitant to call it that? Some people will call it a stimulus package. What should the priority of the country be right now?
Well, for farmers, they need opportunities, not bailouts. And so we don't need another bailout package. I think the governors play a big role in this. They need to get their school systems back open, because for better or worse, families that have 2 working parents have to rely on the school systems for daycare. I know of single moms who are leaving 13-year-old children at home while they go to work. And then you have other folks who are staying home. We've got to quit incentivizing people to stay home with the $600 unemployment bonus, I would say, because that's in addition to the state unemployment program. I've heard from small companies that want to open back up that they can't get their employees to come back. Now that program expires in July. I expect there will be another package in front of us in the House, and I hope it doesn't extend that program, and at least not without some incentives to get the folks back to work and to get the governors to open up their economies.
And when we look at this from a medical perspective, too, it looks like the World Health Organization is saying that at least human-to-human transmission may not be as much of a thing as we initially thought it was, especially when it comes to young people. And that's kind of important to what you're talking about, too, when it comes to getting people back into school, back into work as well, because that was a big worry, that some of that transmission would take place, they would bring it home and then transmit it to more vulnerable populations. So I think we are seeing some good news on that front when it comes to reopening the economy once again. But Representative Massie, I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you.